Welcome, class, to week 2 of our course, EDUC 517, Educational Psychology and Adolescent Development. This week we start to get into the topic of educational psychology, and we're going to learn a little bit about what it is and why we study it. We'll start off with the question, what makes a good teacher? And could good teaching be taught? So if you think about the teachers that you've had that are exceptional teachers, probably a couple of things come to mind. One is that they really knew their subject, whether they were high school teachers or even elementary teachers. They really knew what they were teaching the students. The second is a set of practices grouped together in what we call pedagogy. And that's basically about knowing your craft, knowing how to teach. When you put those two things together, you really have the makings of a good teacher. Pedagogy is the art or science of teaching educational and instructional methods. It's one of your vocabulary words this week. So you might say she studied pedagogy for the 3 years that she was in the program at Mercy. Do you believe that good teaching can be taught? If so, how? When I ask this in the course and when I teach it face-to-face, most of the class usually raises their hands and says, good teaching can't be taught, that you're either born a good teacher or you're not. And in fact, the research suggests that this is just not true. Good teachers can be taught, and if you're already a good teacher, you can be made to be an even better teacher. It begins with a knowledge about the subject, as we said before, but also a knowledge about yourself. And that might surprise you to hear that. But one of the things we know is that the best teachers infuse something of themselves into their teaching, and they understand their strengths and weaknesses. Coupled with that is an ability to make decisions. You have to make 1,000 decisions every week in a classroom. And to make these decisions, you really have to begin to accrete experience over time, know what works and what doesn't work. The application of education research, knowing best practices, knowing what's been studied in the field, and what strategies to use that are grounded in well-developed theories and ideas is also a key part of knowing of making a good teacher. And we'll get into that much more later in the course. All three of these traits combined with the ability to be reflective, to think about what went well and what didn't go well, make a good teacher. Most outstanding teachers demonstrate a trait we call intentionality. So if you think about what doing something intentionally means, it means doing something on purpose. And so this conveys the idea that we want to teach intentionally. We want to think about what we're doing. We want to do things purposefully instead of just letting them happen. It also means that you reflect on your teaching. So let's say you've taught a math lesson the first time and it didn't go well. A reflective teacher would think about what went well, what didn't go well, and change next time, adapt the lesson so that it becomes better. Intentional teachers, therefore, constantly think about the outcomes they want for their students and are purposeful in making decisions that impact those outcomes. They know that maximum learning does not happen by chance. When you're an intentional teacher, you're constantly asking yourself questions such as, what goals and objectives are you trying to teach? Is the lesson appropriate to students' background knowledge, skills, and needs? Is each activity or assignment related to a goal, objective, or desired outcome? And is each instructional minute used well? Another important trait for good teachers is something called teacher-efficacy. And this is the belief that you, as a teacher, can make a difference in students' learning. It's a powerful predictor of impact on students' lives. What this means is that There's been research that's been conducted. Teachers who believe they can have positive impact on students are much more likely to do so than teachers who believe they cannot. Teacher efficacy is an important predictor of teachers' impacts on students. That is, belief they can make a difference in outcomes for students. Looking a little more deeply, teachers who believe that success in school is almost entirely due to children's inborn intelligence, home environment, or other factors that teachers cannot influence are unlikely to teach in the same way as those who believe that their own efforts are key to children's learning. So, what this means is if you examine your own belief system and you say, oh, there's not much I can do for children because most of the impact comes from the home, or most of the impact is simply born in the child, they're intelligent or they're not, you're less likely to have a positive influence over children. Teacher efficacy, the ability that you can make a difference, can grow over time with intentional teaching. Good teachers also focused on student outcomes. The textbook talks about a group of skills called 21st century skills. These are skills that are needed in the 21st century workforce, and they've been defined in the core subjects and with 21st century themes, such as learning innovation skills, creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, information media and technology skills such as learning how to use the rapidly evolving hardware and software in our field and in general, and life and career skills. The Common Core State Standards are a set of standards that were based in part on 21st century skills, and they emphasize flexible creative problem solving, ability to use technology, ability to participate in active discussions, a focus on writing, speaking, and argumentation in groups, an alignment of standards with college and career readiness, a focus in reading on classic texts as well as new and multicultural texts, a focus in math on problem solving in real world contexts, mathematical reasoning, precision, and argumentation. All states have now adopted some version of the Common Core State Standards, which you sometimes see abbreviated as CCSS. Expert teachers are also critical thinkers, and so the research suggests that one distinguishing characteristics that separates novice, that is new teachers, from expert teachers is that expert teachers use critical thinking to analyze their experiences with the express intent to improve outcomes for students. Critical thinking is a logical and systematic approach to the many dilemmas that are found in practice and research. So, if I'm thinking of a practical application for this, a new teacher might encounter a situation where a student misbehaves and send that student to the office for discipline and not think about the impact of that decision. Whereas as you become more experienced at teaching, you start to think about the impact of your decisions. You start to analyze them and think more critically in a way that perhaps you did not before as you gain expertise. And this critical thinking leads to intentionality and to better teaching. So, this is where educational psychology comes in. It's really a tool to help you develop that intentionality and critical thinking, to give you a yardstick against which you can measure your decisions. Educational psychology is the study of learners, learning, and teachers and teaching. Educational psychology is designed to make better teachers and through that study. So, as we study these three things, we can learn what theory and research suggest, for example, about learners in a particular situation. We can use that theory as a guide in our own classrooms, We can determine outcomes to see the effect of applying that theory in our own classroom. We always think about research in educational psychology. What have researchers discovered? And the goal of research in educational psychology is uh, is to test ideas about learning in an objective and fair way. So we might think that we know intuitively, for example, whether something, a practice is good or bad, but that's just our opinion. We might think it's intuitively good, for example, to punish a whole class if one student misbehaves, and that might be our own private belief. But the research may say something else altogether, and that research would be based on fair studies as much as possible and determining in what we call an objective way, to an unbiased way, to try to figure out if it's beneficial to punish a whole classroom instead of one student. It's hopefully to develop a body of what we call best practices that teachers may implement to increase student learning and improve student affect. And what that means, that word affect here, is student dispositions such as motivation for learning, student engagement, their interest in school, etc. Educational resource tries to give value to you as the teacher so it can inform the hundreds of decisions you must make every day in the classroom about students' attitudes, their abilities, strengths and weaknesses, behavior, and more. So you don't go in unarmed. So you have some strategies, for example, to manage classroom discipline, to motivate students to learn, and many more things. Of course, all research has to be combined with common sense. And this is where you as the teacher come in because you really know your classroom the best. So what works in one classroom and what theory says may not necessarily work for your population of students. So that's where your common sense comes in, and that equals effective teaching. So let's think about some of the things we could study if we were educational psychology researchers. We could study some things about learners. For example, we could try to understand if boys or girls learn differently. Do students have different learning styles? Should students with different abilities be taught separately or together? What's the impact of home life on educational potential? And many more things. You could probably come up with a few things that you would be curious about understanding about students and learning. We could study some things about learning itself. For example, we could study what does the brain research say about how we learn? And do metacognitive strategies improve learning? Metacognitive is a word that means thinking about your thinking. So a metacognitive strategy might be to have students write a paragraph reflecting on their learning. So one of the things that's a big area of research for educational researchers is, do some of those strategies improve student learning? Of course, a big area in studying about learning is the types of curriculum that work best in different subject areas. And there are many more areas that educational psychologists study about learning. We could also study some things about teaching. So, for example, we could study how important it is for teachers to be passionate and engaged in their subject area. By the way, it's very important. We could understand how important is it for teachers to be knowledgeable. We could understand what are teachers' impacts on students' academic achievement and how reflective teaching benefits students. Now, some of these topics, again, may seem common sense, but again, don't confuse common sense and your opinion with what's been studied and documented in research studies, because they're not necessarily the same thing. Every week we will focus on some vocabulary, and so In this lesson, we have covered the vocabulary that's in the syllabus, in the timetable of the syllabus. You'll be responsible for this vocabulary as well as the major concepts on the final exam. I'll also remind you that there's an optional vocabulary assignment worth up to 5 points extra credit in the course. Simply download the template in the assignments folder of the course Blackboard site, put the vocabulary word in, define it in another column, and use it in a sentence each week. Upload it by the end of the course. As well as a focus on vocabulary, each week there will be a focus on what you might need to know from this lesson on certification. Most of you know that you need to take certification tests to become certified in the state. Some of those tests include the Educating All Students exam, which is a pedagogical exam. Now you know the meaning of that word. This exam will focus on teaching strategies and what would you do in appropriate situations. So this class will be a very good one to prepare for the Educating All Students exam. You also have your CSTs, your content specialty tests, and you need to pass your CST in your subject area before you enter student teaching. This particular course will not prepare you as much for your CST. However, when you're in your student teaching, you will be completing a video lesson and writing commentary on it, and that exam is called the EdTPA. There is a preparation for the EdTPA in this course that has to do with linking theory and research to a lesson. So you'll be learning a little bit more about that later in the course. For this week, from this lesson, you should be able to incorporate the concept of intentional teaching into lesson plans. So when, for example, you are writing about the EdTPA, you're going to write about reflect on how things went and what you might change for the next time. A second important thing to understand for certification, and your textbook goes into this, is to recognize that the Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium, or INTASC for short, presents 10 standards for effective teaching. Many colleges and universities base their curriculum around these standards. You can locate these standards on page 17 of your textbook. This course is based around these standards, and you can look at the last page of the course syllabus and see the standards and understand what you need to be able to do by the end of a teacher preparation program to be prepared to be a good teacher. So if someone says INTASC to you, think standards to prepare good teachers. At the end of each chapter in your book, there is a self-assessment practicing for licensure. Pause the lecture and get your textbook out and turn to pages 20 and 21. The directions for this are as follows. The chapter opening vignette, the little story, case study, in the beginning of the chapter addresses indicators that are often assessed in state licensure exams. Reread the chapter opening vignette is located on page 3 of your textbook, and then respond to questions 1 to 5. So what we're going to do here is pause it. I'm going to give you a chance to read those questions and write the answers that you think it would be. You don't have to submit this, but we're going to go over it. So you can pause the lecture again while you do so, and when you're ready, go to the next slide, hit play. So did you go through the questions? Let's see if you were correct. Question 1. In the first paragraph, Ellen Mathis does not understand why her students are non-productive and non-imaginative in their writing. According to educational psychology research, which of the following teacher characteristics is Ellen most likely liking? Is it classroom management skills, content knowledge, intentionality, or common sense? The answer is content knowledge. Her students are not misbehaving, so it's not classroom management skills. Intentionality is not it because she really is trying to reflect on what went wrong. It's content knowledge. She doesn't really understand how to motivate and engage students in teaching writing. Question 2. Leah Washington talks with Ellen Mathis about getting students to write interesting compositions. Which of the following statements summarize Leah's approach to teaching writing? Is it A, select teaching methods, learning activities, and instructional materials that are appropriate and motivating for students? Is it B, have students of similar abilities work together so the teacher can adapt instruction to meet the needs of each group? Is it C, when working on writing activities, consider the teacher to be the instruction center? Is it D, individualization is the first goal of instruction, direct instruction is the second goal? When we look at this, the one that makes the most sense is A. Leah Washington selects teaching methods, learning activities, and instructional materials that are appropriate and motivating for the students. Question 3. According to research on the development of expertise, what characteristics separates novice or new teachers from expert teachers? Is it A, novice teachers tend to rely on their pedagogical skills because their content knowledge is less complex? Is it B, expert teachers do more short-term memory processing than novices? Is it C, novice teachers have to constantly upgrade and examine their own teaching practices, whereas experts use a best practices approach? Is it D, expert teachers are critical thinkers? The answer is D, as we covered in this lecture. Expert teachers tend to be more reflective and they are critical thinkers, and you learn to be that as you gain more experience. Question 4. Educational psychologists are often accused of studying the obvious. However, they have learned that the obvious is not always true. All of the following statements demonstrate this idea except one. Which one is obvious and supported by research? So some of these statements are held by opinions by a lot of teachers, but only one is supported by research. Is it A, student achievement is increased when students are assigned to classes according to their ability? Is it B, scolding students for misbehavior improves students' behavior? Is it C, whole class instruction is more effective than individualized instruction? Or is it D, intentional teachers balance competing goals according to the needs of particular students and situations? If you said D, you would be correct. Intentional teachers do tend to teach better and balance these competing goals according to the needs of their students. Question 5. Leah Washington discusses many of her teaching strategies with Ellen Mathis. One can easily see that Leah views teaching as a decision-making process. She recognizes problems and issues, considers situations from multiple perspectives, calls on her professional knowledge to formulate action, and then what does she do? Is it A, select the most appropriate action and assess the consequence? B, choose a strategy that agrees with her individual beliefs about teaching? C, consults with expert teachers and administrators? Or D, allows students to make instructional decisions? Well, we can probably quickly eliminate D. We don't want students making instructional decisions. And you don't always want to be running to your principal to decide what to do, so we can eliminate C. Individual beliefs, though, that might be an tempting one to choose, But remember, individual beliefs are more about opinion and not research. So an intentional correct teacher would choose A, selects the most appropriate action, and assesses the consequence. This has been a great lecture opportunity for me, and I hope you got something out of it. Please feel free to email me if you have questions about the rest of the module. Otherwise, we'll talk more next week.